All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Two Plus podcast. Today, we have a special episode. We are joined by the man who is behind the Pillar Spam list, the Royal Host Poison Death Star list, Christian Denarius. Welcome to the show. How you going?
Hey, Paddy, it's great to be here.
So, for those of you who aren't aware, Christian won the first SBOT with the Wood Elf Pillar Spam list, which sent shockwaves early in the old world community, and then backed it up with SBOT 2, bringing 114, I think you can fact check me on that,
Like
skeleton
that.
archers with poison. And when that dropped, everyone lost their bloody minds. But
Yeah.
we've got a great chat lined up that we're going to talk about the process of list building, competitive Warhammer, uh, online, in-person play, not just the rolling of the dice, but what it's like at that cutthroat edge of competitive Warhammer. And in our eyes, we don't think there's anyone better to talk to than Christian, because we have long, and this is, we joked off air about us being secret admirers, but we've been pretty public admirers of his work. We consider him the world champ, the first world champ, SBOT being the world championships. But I'll stop there with my fanboying, and I'll get stuck straight into it, because I think really Alex and I have always spoken about the interest in list building in Warhammer, and you have a track record of building some really interesting lists that perform really well. So what's your process with, let's just start with the pillar spam list. How long did it take you to get there? What was the process? How do you find those edge cases?
Yeah. So I guess the pillar lists, so Wood Elves were my main and only real faction that I played. So when I started playing on Warhol, and I do have Wood Elves in real life, but I wasn't playing heaps of games in real life. So it was mostly Warhol. And I guess it was a gradual sort of evolution. Like the Wood Elf book is not particularly well written, honestly. Like it doesn't have great internal balance, and so it kind of, I guess it seems obvious now that sort of build, like being the strongest. But I was starting off in the early days of the old world, and we all didn't really have any idea what the best picks were. Um, but over, I guess, a month or two of learning the game and playing a lot of casual games of Warhol, um, yeah, I guess certain things started to stand out as like the best performers in my list. And over time, I cut all of the sort of the tree spirit elements and all the meme stuff that just was cool, but is not super effective. And yeah, I didn't have any history of competitive play before that. So SBOT was my first proper tournament, and I had yeah, I guess I'd refined the list. Like I'd just played a lot of Wood Elves, and gradually I had a few friends that I'd made through on Warhol who I was practicing against, and yeah, just sort of testing the list against. And it was kind of a last minute change as well. Again, it feels really obvious now, but like I had a bit of a different list, and then I had a BSB and some other elements, and I cut all of that and just thought, um, yeah, like I put a lore familiar on a level two. Like no one takes level two wizards, right? And then I sort of realized, sort of a light bulb went off, and it's like, wait, I could actually get like, I usually have like five pillars going off, right? At the level four, randoms edge, which he usually does. And yeah, that was like, okay, yeah, that seems actually pretty awesome. And yeah, I guess the rest is history.
With
But
the
for at least,
yeah,
yeah,
with Wood Elves, so you said you have some in real life as well. So that they're
yeah,
obviously from
models.
previous editions.
Yeah, but never really got to play them much. So it was more
Hmm.
just the hobby side, I guess, just collecting them. But I didn't have a lot of play experience with them.
And
Yeah.
with the pillars in particular, so my first experience with a pillar of fire was like in my second game of Warhammer. I was playing Empire against Alex's Lizardmen, and I cast Pillar of Fire with my level four on foot, and it just kept not being dispelled, and I was like, this
Yeah.
is pretty sick. And I think it tore through 6 gigs or something. I was like, hey, look at me. But how
Yeah, yeah.
long was it? Was it reading the rules that you were like, oh, instantly that's a spike point of power?
Oh no way. Like, because I was a beginner when I started with Wood Elves, and yeah, early on I was like, oh, maybe like Plague of Rust seems pretty good, or like a Fireball, long range, and yeah, took several games, and I'm not sure if I invented it myself independently or if I, heard about it being good, or, but eventually I did realize that Pillar was the spell, and yeah, I guess there's a lot of subtle ways as well that it has advantages. So like Wood Elves so I had the Glade Riders with reserve move, right? So that meant I could sort of move up right to the edge of their dispel range, cast it, and then move back. Or even cast on it, do an opposed cast, try and get it through, and then move out of dispel range, making it really hard to dispel. And like, yeah, over time those sort of synergies started to emerge just through playing, I guess, just through trial and error. It probably took until after the first SBOT, where I started to sort of internalize those principles of list building, because I kind of just trial and errored my way into the first Wood Elf list being a really good list. Then after that, I sort of worked out, okay, there's certain ways to think about things and certain approach you can have to list building, which really helps. There's a few sort of heuristics, sort of like mental shortcuts that I use now, that really help, I think. Some of them are pretty obvious when you say them out loud, but they're obvious when you hear them, but you don't necessarily do them automatically.
And
what would they be? just for our fans.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Just for a friend.
Yeah. So I guess like starting broad, like starting really obvious, right? I guess you'd look at like, what are the undercosted, units, or what are the S tier units for my faction, right? That could be it. Just a really simple, obvious starting point when you're writing a new list. So you'd look at it, you'd go through it all, and yeah, really critically evaluate, like, is this good? And then I guess one way of executing that understanding would be to then try and make that the heart of your list, right? So you're like, okay, yeah, I'm a Wood Elf player, sisters are really good. All right, can I just basically design a whole list around that? That's probably the most straightforward way to do it. And then I guess you can add in other layers like synergy, right? Is another principle. Like, okay, there may be two or more really good units, and can they support each other at all? Because it's not necessarily the best list just to put in, S tier units, right? That's like a starting point. And there's probably a lot as well that I haven't actually articulated that I just am doing automatically as well. But yeah, I'd say that's a pretty simple, good starting point, right? Pretty obvious. Like,
yeah,
what are the good units, and do they work well with each other? Like, those are two things that anyone could do. Yeah, there's a couple. I can go into more. Yeah.
Well, your
look,
list
I think
building.
you can
Sorry,
go into
Alex,
more. What do you think, Paddy? Because sometimes I think, like, if you look at Beastmen or Warriors,
yeah,
I'd look at Dragon Ogres as probably the most undercosted.
Very undercosted, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people talk about Gigantic Spawn, probably of Nurgle, being undercosted. But when I've played that, I feel like it's sort of redundant. Like, both of them are anvil-like units.
Similar role.
Yeah, that's
yes
right.
And no. Yeah, yes and no. I mean, again, then I would say it's coming down more to synergy. So it's like, because they are similar but different. Like the spawn is like a large target, obviously, so much more vulnerable to like certain types of shooting lists, right? Like, because of that. So in some ways it's more resilient because it's higher toughness, regen. In other ways it's more vulnerable. It's got random movement as opposed to movement 7. Like, there are some key differences that it has. Like, it can sort of play a similar role. It's unbreakable. The Dragon Ogres are not. So yeah, they do play different roles, and I would say probably it seems like the Chaos meta at the moment favors Dragon Ogres for that role more than the Spawn, actually. I guess, I mean, that's just a sign of how strong the Chaos list is, that they've got multiple, S tier unit choices, and like any other list would be very happy to have a Spawn, but Chaos can be like, oh no, I've actually got a better unit, to do that role.
Yeah, I think that's what stood out in that Wood Elf list was obviously the sisters were the core, but the
Mm.
level 4, level 2 was a nice
Yep.
like, into the Glade Rider buff
Yeah,
was a
there's
nice
some
bonus.
important some important tweaks there.
Yeah,
The Glade Rider, yeah, I was quite happy with that one. The Glade Rider, the reserve move aspect works
yeah.
really well.
And then you had
Um,
the dragon to actually pack some punch when you
just a
needed it.
tank, yeah, just
Yeah.
a most tanky. So the standard at the time, like the meta build, was like an ogre blade and a
Mm.
talisman on the dragon, and I just went for just pure defense basically. Yeah, I think I had like the 3+ armor,
Hmm.
the like even an obsidian like lodestone.
Lodestone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
For those that want to see it, it was our second ever video. I watched it again in some prep for this.
yeah,
And I
yeah. It seems like a
remember,
170
long time ago.
views.
It's like a long
yeah.
time ago now.
Well, it's almost a year ago, right? That would be
Wow.
July last year. Nah,
Yeah,
it'd be 7 months or so.
yeah, yeah.
But that list was famous for getting the Sisters of the Thorn so ungraciously nerfed into the ground.
Yeah, I guess it's a sort of backhanded compliment. Like,
Yeah,
but I'm
to,
like, oh wait, so was I sort of responsible for that? Like,
without
Oh,
a doubt.
definitely,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah, which is not so. I mean, it's the funny thing is I moved on from Wood Elves after SBOT one, so I don't think I've used them a single time since that tournament because I was so saturated with Wood Elf play at that point. And it's such a particular style of play, and it's so mentally intensive. I would say more than like
hmm,
any other army actually that I played. Both playing into Wood Elves or playing as Wood Elves is probably the most mentally complex experience for me. And yeah, it was quite nice to be like, oh, I'm just going to try some other lists, and but yeah, when the nerf happened, um, yeah, I mean, strongly disagree with it. Like, I don't
mm.
think
Mm.
that it needed to go that far, right? Like, it's almost made them a useless unit. Like, they can take Hammerhand, cool,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
super mediocre, close combat unit, great.
Yeah,
Or you roll up, yeah, Oaken Shield on a unit that has a ward already, like
yeah. You
it's
can get
just
a worse ward save on a unit. That's
yeah,
my opinion of it. Is that they just went so hard and hammered it
so
into the
hard.
ground.
It seems like some sort of biased,
Yeah,
like perspective was involved there. Like someone got smashed by the wealth list and was like, well, that we need to stop that. So let's just like
yeah.
kill it.
Let's kill it.
And they did. They killed Wood Elves competitively.
That
Mm.
was going to be my
So yeah,
follow-up question. Do you think now that sisters are gone, is there any, can you
um,
exploit mass evasive or something to make them
yeah.
useful?
I would say you could still make a semi-viable list. It would just so my first thoughts would be like Deepwood Scouts, right? So
Mm,
you'd just be having heaps of Deepwood Scouts, and I think SBOT has like a rule of 6 for core, so I'm not
yeah,
sure how that would work, but maybe you could take like 2 in core and 3 in special or something.
yeah,
So 5 units of Deepwood Scouts. I mean, so you'd have a sort of knock-on effect there because then you'd have to change other aspects of the list. So it would be
mm,
quite a different list. Like you might want to take elementalism then, right, for the Plague of Rust, or yeah, it would I guess broadly be the similar concept though, that you'd have an evasion list that doesn't want to fight much other than maybe a dragon. And it would probably be even less fun for people to play into, the people who don't like that sort of Wood Elf style of game. Personally, I find it really interesting on either side. Like I played against a Wood Elf list recently, and yeah, it's difficult, but it's really interesting. I thought like it's a really tight maneuver game, and both sides of you are like the whole battle happens in the movement phase, right?
mm,
Like um, yeah, it's just I guess if a lot of players their enjoyment of the game is smashing their units into the enemy units and like rolling dice and like I killed this and then this happened. Like if you want that, you're deprived entirely as
yeah,
with Wood Elves, right? It's like you may never get to charge them in the whole game
yeah,
if it goes well for them. And yeah, that for some people, I guess that just psychologically they really don't enjoy that experience. It's just a different type of
Paddy
game.
has experienced
yeah.
significant racism.
Yeah,
against Wood
as a
Elves.
Wood
Yeah.
Elf
Oh,
player,
so you're Wood Elf main, Paddy?
yeah, I
Yeah.
only have that's my only painted army. I can
Mm.
borrow some friends' armies, but that's what I've played competitively, and people
Yep.
hate it because at the start I made a lot of mistakes and got wiped off the
Right.
table by fireball all the time. But then when I figured out the movement shenanigans,
Yeah.
and if I do it well enough, you can't catch me, and I just plink away and plink away and plink away.
Well, I mean, there's always counterplay, I would say,
Yeah,
right? So it's like, because I guess you can imagine it, if you were playing yourself now, knowing what you know from the other side, could you come up with a way to counter that?
yeah,
And the answer is usually yes, but it's like people often don't seem to want to go through that process. They just want to be like, no, that's broken. Just ban it. Just ban Wood Elves entirely. Like that whole gameplay style should just not exist. We shouldn't have
yeah.
evasive, guerrilla style armies. Should all just be like big units or dragons. Like
Well,
somehow, people are okay with that. It's like
yeah.
just dragon meta.
I think that similar sentiment came up in our tournament scene group chat of ban. I've heard ban Wood Elves, if not ban Paddy, plenty of
Well, I mean,
times.
they did it. They basically did as good a job as they could
Yeah,
banning Wood Elves by, like soft banning Wood Elves
yeah,
effectively from play,
I think so. Yeah.
making
I think so
systems
too.
rubbish. Yeah.
But
But yeah, there
you,
probably is a semi-viable list there with scouts. I haven't tried it, but it's probably not, S plus tier, right?
yeah,
But you could probably get to the finals of SBOT with it.
mm,
Uh, and maybe because Wood Elves are so irrelevant in the meta now, it might actually do okay because no one would be, basing their lists around it.
yeah.
But
Well,
like
that's
it would certainly have some hard counters, right? Like the poison phalanx list, like it's not going to care about big
no.
It's a great segue,
That's a
Christian.
great
That's a great
segue.
segue.
Yeah.
Oh,
So your other list, and this is a
yeah.
great segue because you've gone from you're saying Wood Elves, complexity and brain strain and all of that is often too much for both
Yeah.
players. But
Yeah.
when it came out, this is the 1,200 points, I think, of the list is in this
Oh, more.
Death Star.
I think it's. I mean,
Maybe, yeah.
you can make a variant of the list that has 1,900 points in the
1,900 points, yeah.
right? Like you can have 250-point units and
yeah. For those who don't know, this is a unit of skeleton archers that fires poison. And Tomb Kings have in the Royal Host, and correct me if I'm wrong here, they can always stand and shoot regardless of the range.
Yeah,
They
always stand and
always
shoot.
hit on a 5.
and on yes,
Like
always
chariots.
always volley fire,
Mm.
even on standard shoot. And there's just a bunch of crazy synergies going on. And as I was sort of exploring and designing the list, it was like, oh wait, but that means I can do that. Oh wow. Oh wait.
Yeah, so talk us through that. What was the point from Sisters into that?
Oh, well, there were several months in between. And I guess I didn't really have a clear favorite faction, and which is kind of a bit of a downside, I would say. I think getting reps in with a single list is a huge advantage, like a massive advantage. Just lacking experience with any faction is it makes it a lot harder. But the flip side of that is I got to try, like a wide range of factions and play styles and how did it sort of first emerge? There was another guy, I think his name is Shadow Sun, and we played a game and it wasn't involving Khemri at all. I think he had like Demons of Chaos and who did I have? I can't even remember now. Maybe Bretonnians or something. And it was a very one-sided game. And like afterwards, we were talking a bit because he was not having a good time with demons, and we were sort of giving him some advice around like, oh, maybe you could build some sort of Death Star with demons, and you could do this and that. And then interestingly, we both went away from that conversation, and something must have tweaked in both of us around Death Stars. And independently, we sort of did some research, and then I personally, I was like, oh yeah, what would be like the ultimate Death Star that you could build, in this meta? Like, is there such a thing? And would it be viable? And and the Royal Host really just sort of stood out when I was sort of just going through different different lists. So like to come back to that, like your question, Alex, about like how you approach list building. When list building a Death Star type list, right? There's certain checklists that I have, and like one is, so can the unit that makes up the Death Star be in core, right? Is the first question. If you've got a unit in core that's really good in a large mass, brilliant, right? That makes it even more efficient because you're filling those 500 and probably more with core. And so yeah, the Royal Host definitely ticked that box. And then I guess there's also an appeal in like playing a faction that like Royal Host had just been nowhere on the map before that list. It's just a D tier sort of, or like wasn't didn't seem to be winning anything. And yeah, that also made it appealing to be like, actually maybe there's some secret, amazing meta lists hidden here. And there were just a few other things, like just seeing their banners. They had some really cool banners. They had like the champion can take a 30-point item, which is quite rare for a core. And the stand and shoot thing was huge, and the moving and volley fire thing. And there was also, there were just a lot of synergies. Like the Tomb King can offload wounds that he takes onto a Royal Herald next to him in a challenge, which is really huge. It took me a little while to get my head around it fully because I hadn't played any undead, but just seeing the archers, like archers, poison, you can take a lot of them. They never break, right? They can all volley fire. It's like the wheels sort of started turning, and sort of around the same time, me and that other guy both came out with some Royal Host lists, and then sort of bounced like against each other's ideas and sort of went in somewhat different directions. I actually probably softened the list a little bit. Like I probably could have made it even more, brutal. Especially in hindsight. But you can put 1900 points into the Death Star, right, and just play it like that, which is nuts.
Because there's other variants of it as well.
There are.
Tomb King. So that guy you're talking about was also an
so
SBOT,
he had a variant of it.
And then there was also the Night Goblin. The Night Goblin.
Yeah, were you aware of the Night Goblin? That sort of popped up just before
that popped
life?
up in my sort of timeline. That came after, or like I learned after. So I wasn't influenced by it, but it's kind of interesting when there's an idea sort of like germinating out there, even if you're not in direct contact, like somehow it sort of seems to spread, right? Like one guy hears about it and tells another guy, and then that guy has another idea. Yeah, that's sort of how these ideas evolve. But yeah, the Goblin, I know the Goblin Death Stars also has had some success. Personally, I think like being unbreakable is a huge advantage over that. Yeah, I think the Khemri one is better, but does have some real downsides, like only having level 2s obviously is a struggle. I barely got any spells in the whole tournament. Or when I did get them off, the game was already won, so it didn't matter. And when I really needed them, they never went off. And it is a fairly like luck, like independent of dice list, as in you don't need particularly good dice usually. That is one of the strengths of the list, that it can usually weather some pretty average dice, pretty below average dice. To a point, like more than some lists, definitely.
Do you think, are you surprised that it hasn't taken off more? So I think we were probably at the peak, Paddy, of expanding the channel, and for us, like we'd sort of ridden this wave of dragons, Bretonnia, maybe Tomb Kings reaching an ascendancy, and then Royal Host sort of comes out of nowhere. Like definitely driven by SBOT too. And we thought, that's it. Like I've painted a 2,000-point Beastman army in 2 days. Surely someone out there can just whip together 100 skeletons. It's never emerged in real life, and it also just doesn't seem to have taken traction online.
That's interesting. I've heard of it. I have heard of some people trying to play it in real life and who have like there are players who just have a lot of skeletons just already. It is a bit of a hassle apparently to try and like move 100, 150 like so that, but yeah, like some people have tried it definitely. Haven't had that much success. So that could be one reason, is that like it is a, well, it's interesting. Like you can play it pretty averagely and still do okay with it, I think. But to get better than that, it actually is a surprisingly finesse list to use, right? You wouldn't think so. Like it seems so simple. You just sit there and shoot. But yeah, there actually is a bit to it. Not as much as Worlds, I would say, but it's just a whole different style of play, I guess, because it's like you have to think, how do I maneuver this massive unit and not get outflanked, have my characters in the right spot. There's a lot, have my healers available, preferably not in the unit, so the healing doesn't get shut down. There are quite a few things you need to think through. And I certainly didn't feel like I had enough experience going into SBOT, because I came up with the list in the week before SBOT and had just had a handful of games with it. And yeah, I did learn a bit going through the tournament, but looking back, I'm like, oh, there's so many things, I was doing wrong, like so many misplays and mistakes. And I had to learn the hard way going through the tournament. Like if I was to use the list again, I think I would play it differently. Yeah.
So do you think it's interesting that no one else is playing it? So if SBOT 3
yeah, I think they will.
soon,
I mean, I know,
okay.
I think the other guy will. And
Yep.
I mean, it's interesting. Like I also thought there'd be more Wood Elf lists, right? After SBOT 1, I thought like, oh, there's got to be someone that's like, oh, what was the winning list? I'm just going to do that. But there is a bit of a barrier to entry with Wood Elves. Like they're probably one of the hardest factions to learn, and so that alone probably put them off online even. With the phalanx, yeah, online obviously there's no physical barrier to entry. You can make a list with 1,000 goblins if you want, right? I think some people will play it. Yeah, I predict in SBOT 3 there will be some, at least a few people playing it.
Well,
I'm not sure if I'll be one of those people, but
yeah, why don't we talk about so SBOT 3? There's
inevitable.
There's talk of one coming around the corner. One thing I always find really interesting with the top tier of competitive play is the meta never really stays still. Like people seem to like to win with a list and go, okay, done. Let's find a new one. It's like the challenge of finding a new list and
I don't know.
moving
yes,
on.
It really depends on the player, I would say. So like there are some successful top players. In fact, I would say most of them don't change their faction or even their lists. Like there's some who just run a single list nonstop. And there's like the guy who won the second SBOT is just a chaos player, right? Like as far as I know, like he just plays chaos, and yeah, he might tweak the list a bit, but there is a big advantage just to playing, one list or one faction, and like endless repeats. You do improve a lot with it. I'm personally wanted to change from Wood Elves, but I think most of the top players probably are kind of locked in. So that's another reason, right? So like if you're kind of locked in already and you're a top player, and then someone comes up with this new wacky list, they probably are not going to switch to it, right? That's one reason. Another is that it didn't actually perform that well overall. Right. So there were 3 of them. There was my list, and there was another list which was almost identical to my list, which someone had basically just copied my list. It got leaked a few days before the SBOT, and someone just copied it. And then there was the other one, which was mostly the same, like 10% different, 20% different. And 2 out of 3 lists didn't qualify to the finals or to the qualifiers stage, the top 10 or top 20 or whatever it was. And so that already, right, is kind of off-putting, I guess, to some people. And then my list got to the semi-finals, which is like, decent result, but it's not as memorable as winning or even getting to the finals of SBOT, right? And there were 2 chaos lists in the final, and there were like a huge amount of cult, mortuary cult lists.
Yeah.
I guess like a lot of players probably look at that and yeah, like if they just wanted to win, right? If they just wanted to copy a strong list, they'd probably be more drawn just based off that to just be like, oh, well, chaos, right? Or obviously the strongest because the 2 finalists were chaos. So yeah, that could be another reason why it hasn't. If you like, you're saying that it hasn't been copied that much. Yeah, I personally also I'm not sure that it's the list I want to play. It is like it is strong, and I think it can be even stronger if I if I was to practice it more and really learn that style of gameplay, just how to maneuver one unit really well, right? Like there are certain principles like, oh, okay, I can sort of anchor one flank against a house, right? So cool, so that flank is now safe, so I sort of angle it and things like that that you normally don't really have to think about to that extent. Like you really have to think about that one unit, right? It's like all your eggs are in one basket. So one mistake, like one movement mistake, you can just lose the game. And the games I lost in their spot were that basically. It was like, oh, whoops, I should have tilted it actually a bit of a different angle, or oh, I should have actually moved that character there. And then just because of that the game's lost. So it is, yeah, it is a challenging list to get really good with. But at the same time, so it's interesting to me. Like I actually enjoy playing it, especially against other top lists. One issue I kind of have though is it is a bit of a bully list, like for the especially for the qualifying matches. And unfortunately, SBOT 2 was regional pools, so I was up mostly against Aussies. So it was like felt bad, just like going up against all these local players and just be like, cool. So like this is my list. Like it's designed so that you have like a statistically insignificant chance of winning, right? So, like good luck, like let's have fun.
They can't bring you to a real life tournament, Christian, and shake hands.
Exactly, yeah.
Statistically insignificant.
Cool. So like, I don't know if you know this, but I've actually designed this list so that there's just no chance, right? So like, there's no game actually here. Yeah, I mean that is. I can see why that's not that fun for them. I mean, to some extent, it's just the way tournaments go, right? There's going to be some killer lists, there's going to be some softer lists, and some casual lists even that just are there for fun. And that's okay to some extent. There's different tournaments happening within the same tournament, different streams. But maybe this one, yeah, it did ruffle some feathers, I guess. Just it maybe feels non-interactive to the other person.
We're sort of big believers in SBOT. I mean, we're not trying to toot our own horns, are we, Paddy? But like early on, it became obvious that there are a lot of the real life game is a more social experience, and it's tactile, and it takes a long time, and you've put a lot of hours into whatever. It's almost like you've got a commitment to the other player. However, online, it's abstraction in its purest form, and we've had to sort of navigate like in the channel that we want to promote. Yep, we love the culture of the game and having a loose game as well, as much as you should. Playing well has its own rewards, and SBOT is the pinnacle for that. So do you think that, like I really think it is. And, we hear about, because we sometimes or intermittently do these reviews of the big events, and my experience, it has been that like a lot of the lists are quite weak, and that people are spending 2 days of their weekend getting towards the 4th or 5th round before they're really facing anything that isn't just raffle stomping some poor guy with a themed giant rat list. However, in SBOT, people know what they're in for. And as you say, while they might want to play a theme list, it's a big commitment. And sadly, yes, in Australia, I saw the sort of list in our division and thought, oh, there's a lot of people who are missing the forest for the trees. But it seems like overseas, it's fairly competitive.
Yeah. I think that's true, especially the SBOT. I mean, there were some decent lists in the Aussie pool, Like Tegamander had a pretty good list.
We've had him on, and he was
Yeah.
very knowledgeable about the game in general.
Yep, yep, for sure. It's not that they were. I mean, they were still like. I wouldn't say they were like soft thematic lists, right? But like they were still. They realized it was SBOT, and they realized it was that sort of culture of a tournament, high level tournament. I wouldn't say they were even trying to just there was no meme, like truly meme lists that I saw. It's just that there's it's just a different weight division though, I guess, like the phalanx list. Like it's you don't even need to have a soft list, to be smashed by it, right? You could have like a like fairly good list that like you bring down to your Friday games night, and you could win, like be really good there, right? And then it's sort of like you're a regionals player, and then suddenly you're at the World Cup, right? And you could be like a good regionals player, right? You could be the best regionals player in the state or the country, and then suddenly you're at the World Cup, and it's like, oh wow, okay, there's actually a whole different sort of weight class, and it's not a contest even. Like that is kind of how it is at SBOT with those top 10 or 20 lists in the whole tournament. I think I mean, I think the same is true for people versus any of those lists, right? Like if they were up against those chaos lists or Khemri cult lists, or I don't think that a lot of lists would have much chance if you were looking at the percentages objectively. But maybe the feeling is more interactive. Maybe it's not as obvious, like going up against the Khemri list. Somehow the experience, I guess, can just be like crashing into a brick wall, because it's like there's no chance you're getting through this, right? Like if you don't have the tools already in your army, like and a lot of lists didn't, like there's certain really hard counters that the list has. So I guess you can start by looking at its strengths, right? So it does really well against any sort of shooting list, right? Because it's so resilient, it heals itself, and it shoots back really effectively. So if you've got a gun like an Empire gun line or something, 0%, I would say, or negligible chance of winning that. I just don't see how you can get points. You can shoot cannons in and try and get some characters, but they've got like a lot of wounds. They get a lookout, sir. Meanwhile, the phalanx, is just doing a volley every turn and deleting an Empire unit. So, any list that involves shooting really, really struggled against the phalanx. So I guess then you have to look at what's the opposite of that, right? Like the lists that could do well against it are going to be some really killer close combat lists that can actually have a chance of overwhelming it in close combat, because no one is going to win like a shooting duel with the phalanx list. I can't think of any list that could do that role better. So I guess like Chaos obviously did manage to beat it. They're the ultimate, low shooting, maximum close combat faction. That's their whole thing. They rely on like burst damage and like having better stats in close combat than any other faction. And I think I wouldn't say they counter it, but they're capable of, they have the tools potentially to beat it. And so I guess you could look at several factions and be like, do they have a really, really killer close combat focused list possible? And a lot, even some surprising ones that are not usually that strong, like dwarves or something, could do very well against the phalanx, I think. Maybe most factions even probably have a list they could build that could compete against it. It's just then the question is that list also going to be, versatile and good against other lists? But it's definitely beatable, and like we saw, it clearly was beatable because it didn't win SBOT, and most of the lists didn't even get into the finals.
How much do you think on that point? Like, how much of top end competitive Warhammer just comes down to list matchup? Obviously, at the top tier, when you've got players that are all good. How much does it come down to this list losing to this list?
It's hard to say exactly, I guess, but it's certainly, I guess, any single variable is so important at that point, right? Because so it's like if every player is good, but one is 5% better, then that alone could decide the matchup, or if one player's dice are 10% better on that day, or if their list has a bit of an advantage, or any single factor could make the difference. Because yeah, at that really top end, everyone really wants to win, right? And often they're doing some practice games beforehand. That's another part, I guess, of the player skill would be the preparation that they put in for that particular matchup, and that can vary a bit. Like I know for myself, I had certain weeks where I had more free time, and I was able to prepare really well. Especially in SBOT 1, I had more time to prep. SBOT 2, unfortunately, I had less free time and didn't do enough, homework, and then definitely felt the lack of reps in some of those games. Like, oh right, I forgot they could do this. Oh right, yeah. Like figuring out on the fly is definitely not where you want to be. But it's a lot closer to real life Warhammer, for better or for worse. But that is a unique part of the online sort of meta game, is that there is just that, like, you get a week to prepare, right, for the game. Like, so it is, I mean, that is cool because it means there's a higher potential level of play in the actual game. Yeah, but yeah, I think the list matchups are definitely a significant factor. Like, just because anything is at that level, but they're not a guarantee. Like when you've got such good players, anything's possible. You get people who win games where the lists are not in their favor. Definitely, that is possible.
Do you think that's about mental resilience to sort of take a 30% chance, maybe is your best chance?
Yeah,
Or do you
yeah,
think it's
definitely.
more about waiting for your opponent to make a mistake and
But both of those could work, I guess. Yeah, like both of those approaches. So like, yeah, if you really understand the matchup and you you calculate that this 30% chance is the best you're ever going to get, and you take it and it works. I mean, that was the best move, right? That like, it may not usually work, but when it works, it works. And then another one is, yeah, if you prep for the game and you notice some sort of subtle elements of the matchup coming out in that practice game that the opponent may not have caught or be ready for, and then that does pop up, and you're prepared and you can just act. Yeah, that's another huge advantage. Like, there's so many things that could sway the game on the day. I mean, that's why it's high level play is really interesting. High level competition in any sort of field, right? Because it's like anything could happen. It's there's no foregone conclusion. Yeah.
What do you
Do
think?
you think that, sorry, Paddy,
No,
you go.
you go. You go. All good. Keep going.
Well, I didn't want to go too far beyond talking past the deal, but I thought that, so when you say that, what do you think is immersive about Old World? It's not a game renowned for its, I guess, like reward for, like, there's a lot of luck and you have to accept
Mm.
that to an extent. What keeps you coming back then, if in a sense that like you sort of have to accept your fate in many matchups? Or,
I mean,
not even matchups, just with the dice, you look at the ones and you think, oh,
that
well.
sure. I mean, sometimes that's part of the appeal. I think that's probably why it's a bit like why some people like pokies machines, right?
Yeah.
It's
Is that what
the
we're doing? Okay.
well, on some level, right, you're getting a dopamine hit. So
Yeah.
the uncertain outcome is part of the appeal, right? Like, at the same time, you look at a lot of the top players who consistently perform well. You see familiar names. So clearly, if luck was the main variable, you wouldn't really see that, would you? Like the like player choices still are really significant, even with the luck. I mean, the movement phase. I remember reading ages ago, like the most important phase is the movement phase, right? Which is not super luck dependent for the most part. And the better you are, I guess, the less luck dependent it is. If you've got your charges, if you're just making safe charges, everything's well positioned. Yeah, I guess that's one skill, is reducing your own luck dependence as a general, because you're not going to get consistent results when you're taking big risks a lot of the time. Like, you can only get so far with that approach, I think. So yeah, it is interesting when you've got two good players like that, and both are trying to minimize risk, and it does become quite an intense sort of mental contest. And the list itself, yeah, the matchup is it always is significant. Yeah, but the luck factor, I mean, of course, it sucks sometimes to feel like you played better or you played really well and then you lost is not such a great feeling. But sometimes, I certainly won games where I felt like I think he actually played that better than me. But damn, the dice did what they did, and like I won. I'll take it. So you get some of those as well, right? Like I think to ever win a tournament, you need a bit of luck, especially like SBOT, right? Like you can play really well, but you're probably not going to play your A game 100% of the time on every single game. You're going to make some mistakes, and everyone does. And there are definitely times it can be harder to notice your own luck, your own positive luck, right? Because there's a natural. I think we often have a bias towards like, oh, like that was such an unlucky, or he got so lucky. But
definitely,
yes, I do try and sort of view my games objectively and notice like, actually, yeah, that probably shouldn't have worked, right? What I did there, but it did work, So can I try and still learn, from that? Like, don't try that again. Like, okay, I got lucky that time, but that actually wasn't the right move. Yeah, the luck, I guess, is what makes a different game than chess or something. Like chess with dice, right? So there is a pure sort of skill element to the game, and then there is the luck element, and then there's the intersection between those two elements, and who can think on their feet as well. Like some unexpected things are often going to happen during the game, and then it's like, can you adapt to that? Is another whole skill.
The point you just made then about recognizing your own luck is something we talk about a lot on this channel, because a lot of time we think that the conversation around the old world gets pretty negative, and people are unaware of the moments that we like to call them moments that are happening in front of them in games. And sometimes you do roll hot and it's awesome, and at the same time you're still thinking about the 3 6s that he rolled the turn, or they rolled the turn before.
Some people have a really extreme bias with that. Yeah.
Really, do you find at the top end, people are still enjoying the moments of Warhammer, or are they literally, is it maths and dice and probability?
No, it's certainly not for me. Like I still remember moments from all of my SBOTs, good and bad, and some of them, I guess some of them are like taking down notes, like, okay, I shouldn't have done that. That was, incorrect play. Others are like, oh, that was a cool moment. Like, I can think of several huge moments that were memorable and exciting or heartbreaking.
Relive them for us, Christian. Relive them for us. Just your top 3.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a top 3, but first off the top of my head, okay, so the first SBOT, I was playing Tech Commander, and it certainly felt like a very close game. It ended up it was like a 20-0 in the end victory, but it didn't feel like that, and it wasn't like that until the very end. Like that's the thing with Undead. Like if they collapse, they can just totally collapse. But it was a very, very close contested game before that, and I had my dragon into his Blood Knights, and they were he was rolling some pretty good armor saves, and the Blood Knights, I kind of expected them to die. They had pillars going through them. They had the dragon sort of overkilling every turn, and I was like, just got to wipe that unit, and they just weren't dying. And then it started getting worse and worse, and he was bringing up other troops and support, and the dragon was actually getting overwhelmed. And yeah, there were just like a couple of key roles. There was one moment where I was like, oh, I really hope he doesn't like lower the leadership of that dragon. And he like, there's a hex or something that can lower his leadership. And I think maybe he saw the obsidian lodestone and thought, no, I won't get that off on the dragon. And went for a different target. And then the dragon barely like passed his break test against that unit and didn't get sort of pushed off the board. Had that happened, it would have been a really tough game. So it's just, I guess crucial roles like that. With Wood Elves, it often came down to the dragon. In the final against the Orcs, like you guys were mentioning earlier, had some like quite unlucky sort of dice against. There was a duel with my dragon and the orc, black orc wyvern, and I was like feeling pretty confident, like, oh yeah, this is a matchup I win, and then suddenly, oh, these are really bad dice. I've actually like lost, that combat. And then it was like, yeah, just one leadership test, which it was like a 9 or a 10 or something. Like it was pretty likely, but still, the moment, it definitely just felt like a moment. Like, if I make this, I think I win, right? I'm ahead on points. The game's about to end. But still, just watching like just the excitement and anxiety of pressing to roll the 2 dice. It's like, oh, like I could just see it in my head, double 6 coming up, right? So that was, I guess often the dragon duels were really important. So they're really memorable. I don't know if I can think of a third big moment, but there are a lot. Yeah, like I definitely have memories of them. So yeah, I guess it's definitely not like a spreadsheet and maths experience for me, but there is that element to it, I guess, to improve one's play, to try and boil it down and to try and be really hard-nosed and objective in your thinking. But no, I still find the games, certainly in retrospect, they're really fun. Maybe at the time, but it's more high pressure, so you can't fully, like enjoy it. I think like witnessing it as an observer is just entertaining. But when you're actually playing it, and there is a lot of pressure, especially once you get into like the quarterfinals or the semis or the final itself. The final itself is like, oh, it feels like a lot of pressure, definitely.
It was sweaty. I watched it. It's on YouTube. I'll see if I can link it into this video. I will, because it's like
it should.
turn
It's
like
good.
4, 5, 6. It was getting really sweaty, and that was the issue at the time running out. And I was like, oh shit, man, what's going to happen?
There was the whole other dimension added to it because they wanted a timer, and then there were some technical issues with the game, and they just deducted that off the timer. So so it ended up being a really, really rushed game, which added to the stress for both of us. I think like we both made some mistakes because of the time pressure. Sure. Yeah.
What do you So another complaint of the old world, at least competitive scene, is that there's only a handful of armies that can win tournaments. So a lot of the time you see Bretonnia, Exiles in particular, Warriors of Chaos with the Fat Dragon. Tomb Kings have a couple of variants that seem to be pretty persistently up the top now. High Elves make top 5s quite often. If you don't have a Dragon or a Death Star at the moment, it feels like you can't win a top tier tournament, is what a lot of people would think. Do you think there's viability in the 9? Let's just leave it. Let's go to the 14, I suppose, because they're all active. 14 armies. How many? You have to put an exact number. But do you think many of them can actually win a tournament?
I guess it comes down to comp is the first question, right? So I've really been enjoying. There's a German tournament I'm playing online, the second iteration of it, and that's really quite heavily comped, but well comped, I think. And I've been talking to the guy who runs it, and we've sort of been hashing out some ideas for how to even further refine the comp. I think with that comp, there's a wider range of viable builds for sure. In just the sort of standard, best of rule of 3 comp, if that's the only restriction. So all the ones you listed definitely have a list that can win, I would say, right? So Bretonnians, I guess it depends if we're including the armies of infamy or not, but even just going by just going by the main. So Tomb Kings, yes. Bretonnians, yes. Chaos, yes. Who else was there? High Elves. I'd say yes. They're probably like an A tier faction, so probably any A tier can win, but it's harder, obviously. Wood Elves have dropped maybe from from an S tier to like a D tier. So, but even then, I think with the right, if you had the right pathway, if you got the right matchups, you could win SBOT with Wood Elves now, I would say, because they do play well against Chaos. That's always been a pretty favored matchup in my experience. Cult, yeah, I'm not sure. I've never tried that matchup without sisters. But they they could easily be a pathway there where the Chaos beats the Cult for you, and then you beat the Chaos list, and you could still get. So I guess viable, yes, I would say. If you mean like a not insignificant sort of percentage, like feasibly, yes, they could win. Even Wood Elves, High Elves.
Do you think fan favorites of Empire, Orcs and Goblins, and I'd probably put maybe Dwarves.
Fan favorites,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you reckon
So I've been playing Orcs at the moment in the German comp. I have a nomadic list that I played last tournament, and just a general Orcs list. I'm playing this one. I'm really enjoy them, and they've been really effective. The Orc lists, the nomadic lists won the first tournament, and I mean, what a crazy list! Like, there's impetuous on everything, which is really hard to play around, and it was wacky, but they've got some really cool stuff. Like I could see an Orc list winning SBOT. I don't think it's like favored. Like I wouldn't bet money on it, but like there's so much there's still unexplored ideas, I think, and like underdeveloped lists. I look at lists that win tournaments, and I'm like, that's not even an optimized, list, not even close. Like there'd be so many lists that could beat that. So I think as long as that remains, the table's still pretty open. Like I think most factions, at least maybe 2/3, could build a SBOT winning list. It wouldn't be favored, but it would be viable. And then probably the bottom third, it's starting to really be a struggle. Like how ogres, for example. Like if someone wins SBOT with an ogres list, I'll tip my hat to them. Like that would be pretty impressive.
Shout out to a couple of our friends in our local scene are running out this DEATHSTAR, they like to call it, which is
nice.
Iron Guts with like 1,000 points.
I have a similar concept for my ogres list, which is like a what are they called? Those I can't remember the name. The guys who have pistols.
Lead. Oh no.
What? I have no idea what this is. Ogres are so obscure.
Yeah.
There's ogres with pistols?
Ogres with pistols. They're big pistols. So they got like longer range.
They're more like guns.
They're like
I'll worry about it after.
They're like the elite ogres. I forgot.
Elite ogres.
Yeah, they're the elite ogres. So you can give them poison shooting pistols. You can give them a banner so they reroll ones. So you can get some decent, shooting out of them. And then on top of that, they're just really good in close combat. So you can make an attempt at an ogre DEATHSTAR, which is, I've only practiced it a couple of times, but like it was cool, and it wasn't, it was sort of effective. It's a bit of a stretch to win SBOT with that faction. But most tournaments are not SBOT as well, right? Like as you guys said, SBOT is like the leanest and meanest, sort of harshest end of the tournament scene, like most unforgiving arena. And also it has certain inbuilt rules that, like, it's win-loss format, so you can't draw even a single game, right? But you can win just by 100-point victory. So that type of comp really massively affects the lists, the viability and the style. Like it leans into a DEATHSTAR build, because you can just points denial, right? It's like everything's in my DEATHSTAR, come and get it, and if you don't, you're not going to get the win. So whereas if it's a 20-0 format, which I personally prefer, I think that makes for more interesting, aggressive games, because there's a risk reward element where you're like, let's say I'm winning on turn 4, like, but if I stop now, I'd get like a 12-13, 12-8, 13-7, or do I, take a risk and push my advantage and go for like a 20-0, but maybe push too far and actually like draw or lose the game. So that sort of like process or that sort of like questioning is really interesting to me, right? And you just don't get that with a win-loss. So just because a list isn't probably going to win SBOT doesn't mean it's not, viable full stop in a tournament sense, right? Like depending on the comp, depending on the missions, that's another way. If there's missions that favor certain different builds, like I think that is a big role that is emerging for TOs and tournaments, is to make some interesting comp. Not going too far. Not going too far. On the other hand, like not over comp, or doing some wacky, like biased sort of comp, like similar to the last FAQ, basically. But like if you got some TO who just hates, Bretonians, so it's just like I'm just going to ban, Peg Knights or something. It's probably going too far, right? Like that's too extreme.
It's a conversation we're having because we've run some tournaments and we find like Paddy and like his a Wood Elf player and that the ban essentially on Sisters created, like, I think Paddy, you're able to sort of articulate the response of the average player who's painted a bunch of models and is invested in learning how the army plays, has taken the scorn of a community on his shoulders.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, like that feeling is absolutely negating to what in real life you need to do at the very minimum. So it's funny because we're trying to build a different sort of time. People are getting a little bit in real life.
Yeah.
The rules as written 2K format has become pretty blunt in real life, and we're looking for alternatives. But I think, have agreed, Paddy, that if everyone's got to play the models they have, and you don't want to exclude anybody from coming to the event if they've only got, most people in real life have 1 to 2 armies tops. So it's interesting online, people playing around with this in a more abstract environment, but in real life, there are these constraints that are really starting to emerge, and they're delicate in how you balance them.
Yeah. What's the comp that you're playing with in this German tournament that you said?
I can send you it. But to summarize, so there's like limitations on a lot of the traditionally most powerful aspects. So everything meta, the idea is that everything meta gets hit. So like dragons are toned down for the most part. So like if you're over 400 points, you can't take magic items on a character, right? So you can take a naked dragon, like the guy can take a lance or two-handed sword or something, but that's it. So there's no talisman of protection. There's no Wood Elf spites. There's no stuff like that. So dragons are toned down. Death Stars are toned down because there's a 50 model max. So there's no 150, Khemri phalanx going on. There's a few things like that. One of the changes I do like is that Sisters actually got a slight glow up from that.
Yeah.
They're allowed to choose tree singing as instead of what they roll, right?
Nice.
So it's not a huge buff, but it's like even that gives them a role. It's like, okay, at least they can cast a useful spell. It probably is still not enough to be viable, but it's something, right? It's like, okay, well, maybe I would consider taking Sisters.
Well, they don't have to take Stormcall or whatever the elemental is.
Hammerhand. Yeah, I mean, Hammerhand is a great spell when you're, like when you want to get into close combat. When you're like a toughness 3, no armor, like 1 hand weapon attack unit, like you really want to be in close combat? Like, not usually.
We've got a little bit of time left, but I wanted to kind of so you have a massive online presence. You have a real life army. You mentioned the Wood Elves earlier. Do you play in real life?
I haven't. So my Wood Elf army is not, like, I never quite got it to, like, I never quite got everything in my SBOT list, physicalized. So I did play a couple of casual games at a local club, but yeah, I never got it tabletop ready with all the miniatures I needed, and online was always there and always easy. And also, I guess I felt like, so after SBOT, a lot of people were asking like, what real life tournaments are you playing? And I kind of looked at them and I saw the meta there, and I was like, I feel like yeah, the online meta is quite different. It's like a different game almost, like at that stage anyway. Like it takes, yeah, probably several months for the ideas to sort of disseminate, because people have to paint up the models, right? And there's all these barriers to entry. So looking at like the real life tournaments and then seeing like, oh, okay, that like they're from a meta 6 months prior or something.
Yeah.
So if I'd rocked up with my Wood Elf list, I just think it would have been really brutal, right? It's like that, yeah, it would have been that same thing of like, there's not really a statistically high, relevant percentage that you're going to win this game, right? Like yeah, like taking an SBOT killer list to a real life tournament seems pretty harsh. So I guess I have to tone it down a little bit, which is fine. Like I am starting to properly get into the painting hobbying side for the first time in my life with the Bretonian army. And not that Bretonians are exactly a soft army, but you can make a variety, of lists with Bretonians. And yeah, I don't think, I mean, everyone knows they're strong, but maybe they wouldn't feel as bad losing to a strong Bretonian list compared to, the Poison Phalanx list or the Sisters.
There's too much hate against Britannia, isn't it? Like,
I agree. Like, yeah, I agree.
They're not that.
They're probably slightly overrated, honestly. Like, slightly. Like, how many SBOTs have Bretonians won? How many SBOTs have Bretonians gotten into the finals? None. Oh, what about the semi-finals? None. What about the quarterfinals? Like maybe one of the both the SBOTs. But like it's their performance at that really top end has been pretty lackluster, which is interesting, right? It's like people say they're the S tier army. I do think there's so many variables. Like I was saying earlier, that like I do think Bretts are definitely capable of winning SBOT. It's just we've only had a couple so far, and maybe I'll run them for the third one. They're on my they're on the list of possibilities. It'll either be that. I've got a couple. I guess it could be that. Could be the Phalanx. Maybe an Orc list. Maybe even a Dwarf list that I've been working on. There's a few ideas kicking around, but then I need to really start practicing it because just having at least a dozen games under your belt is such a big advantage. Like just knowing the rules of your own army. Like I felt with the Tomb Kings with the Royal Host list, I still didn't fully know the rules even that I was using. Like the healing and everything, and remembering to do it and the order to do it and everything. It's like there's just quite a rules intensive list.
What is the practice process? I know in our pre-chat you mentioned Techomando, who we mentioned before. I think you said you played a practice game against him. Are you playing, like generally I presume you're playing against that top tier player so you get that kind of experience?
So I've got a couple of people online who I play against. There's a guy in Germany who I often, it's probably the main opponent that I test lists with. I probably need actually, honestly, more training sparring partners because I don't have like people who can play every faction at all. Like, in fact, they're both VC players who I play against. So, and that's quite an atypical army. So that probably is a bit of a weak spot in my sort of tournament chances. Like, I could definitely do with more well-rounded practice matches. But yeah, that is part of it. Definitely is just having some good players who you can play against. Is definitely going to improve your game.
And do you guys talk about your list lead? Like, do you say, because one of the things I want to speak about on this is like, I want to try, when we play casually, I'm like, I want to bring, for the fun of it, 24 Eternal Guard with a BSB in it. Like, so don't bring your 700-point dragon to this one, please. Kind of thing.
With us, it wouldn't, the conversation is usually tournament leaning. So it'd be like, I want to try, 50 Eternal Guard, but it's because I think that actually could be viable for a tournament, right? So let's actually test it, test its mettle. Is it actually viable? I mean, I would, I'm going to assume no with the Eternal Guard, but like,
we'll see.
If I was to do that, it would be because I've got some crazy brainwave that I'm like, actually, maybe there is something here, like if I do this and I take this and, so yeah, it is usually like we're not really playing 100% casual games. Like they're not 100% competitive either because they're just practice games, but they are usually there's that sort of tone of like, let's take a proper tournament list and you take a proper tournament list and we'll hash it out, like, and we'll both learn from that and then refine both of our lists. I think there is I think there is a real space for casual thematic play in Warhammer. I think if you're going to do that though, like do it all the way, right? Like take some pre-generated missions like that used to be in like, you remember like in White Dwarf, or there used to be, you could buy like a box, right, with all these like missions. Yeah, back in the 90s, there used to be like these boxes you could get, and they would have a whole story and narrative and all these comps and restrictions. And I mean, that's really cool. Like I'd love to play that sort of game.
Well, they've just re-released some narrative, which is sort of telling in the direction they're taking. But I can't remember
awesome.
The High Elf Chaos one stuff came out.
Right. I'd be really keen on that, or something like, you get random magic items, right? Like it's like you get like a deck of magic items, and oh, cool, I've got a sword of might. Okay, like I'll give this to my general, or something. Like that's really fun, and I'd be really keen on that style of play as well. Obviously, totally different to the tournament type of experience, but
might come for our 1K.
Yeah,
you're gonna do 1,000 points, Christian.
If you're gonna do the like thematic casual, I think do it like take it to the hilt. Like make it a whole thematic experience. That's really fun. Yeah, like
one of the things that Alex is mentioning there that we believe has legs in that kind of social play aspect, definitely not as top tier competitive, but 1,000 points with some pretty targeted restrictions in place. Smaller board, smaller armies. The testing that we've done, it promotes a lot of engagement in combat, and there's less running. There's less running and hiding, which I think, as you mentioned, a lot of people like to run at each other and fight. And whether that's the right way to play Warhammer or not competitively, it's definitely a fun way to play. And that's what we're kind of.
When I was a kid, that's how I played.
That's it.
And like you'd go into a games workshop back in the day, and they'd have these games night. And as a kid, I could never afford, to get my dream army all painted up and awesome. But you could go to Games Workshop and experience that, and they would give you one unit for the whole army, and that was your unit, and you controlled it, and that was really fun. I'm sure I wasn't doing, galaxy brain moves with that one unit most of the time. It was pretty much just like, get in, let's get stuck in. Like I want to do something, and it was all uncoordinated, sort of like more like a real battle. Everyone doing their
4+4+5+ save.
Exactly. The rolls were really, it's like, come on, you gotta make this like that was so that is a valid and cool way to play the game. It's not the only way to do it, but it's awesome. I guess there's a bit of an issue. It's like if you've got that thematic rich storytelling at one extreme, and you've got like pure competitive tournament play on the other extreme, where it can get a bit murky is anywhere in between, right? Because say you've got like a tournament, and then people are like, oh, that's too hard a list that you brought. It's like, well, what exactly is the
what are the parameters?
Like it's like is it just your discretion? Like the TO is like, oh no, you're allowed that, but that feels a bit too hard, and or that if there's actual comp rules, then great, we can all play around that. But sometimes there does seem to be this sort of nebulous, like unclear vibe in some casual games where it's one thing to say let's just have a casual match, no one bring dragons, like but what if it's several steps sort of more competitive than that? Where do you draw the line? It's like, oh you have a dragon, but no, don't take that. That gets a bit murky. So it is really nice when it's just defined for me. Like it's sort of like, just give me the rules pack, and then I can be as hardcore and ruthless at trying to squeeze out a list from that rules pack. If you want to tone it down, then you do that, right? Like don't expect the player to self sort of sabotage their list and make it softer. Like you just do that as a TO.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are out of time here. So I might wrap it up here and start by thanking you very much, Christian. Denarius, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a long time coming for us. Yeah, it's great insight for us at that top level, and then even just then, what the expectation of a Warhammer player is fantastic. So again, thank you very much. Good luck in upcoming SBOT and your German tournament if it's still going. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you around in competitive play. So thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Thanks, Paddy. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Christian.